Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Draft Talk on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Sorry, it's been a while. I'm Alan Saunders. That's Nick Farabaugh. We've been a little busy covering the draft, but we finally found a way to get back together with you. Now in the month of April, we're going to try to do this every weekday leading up to the 2023 NFL Draft. We're going to try to make this a little bit shorter, a little bit easier on us, a little bit easier for you guys to digest, hopefully, and we'll keep it moving and get through these all of April long. Today, we're going to talk about wide receiver and why the Steelers don't really seem to be pushing to draft one. That's what I wrote about today at the site SteelersNow.com, how the Steelers don't appear that interested in Jordan Addison. And, they did meet with him at the Combine. They did not send a particularly large compliment to his pro day. They did not have him in Pittsburgh for a pre-draft visit. It does not. Mike Tomlin asked point blank at the owners' meetings, do you care that Jordan Addison and Kenny Pickett played college football together? And he said, no. It's just not part of their process. And so to me, that makes it seem like Jordan Addison's not very likely. Everything I just said about Jordan Addison, except for the Kenny Pickett part, I could say about Quentin Johnson, one of the other top receivers in the draft. And Jackson Smith and Jigba, they did go to his pro day. However, two of the top four tackles were there too. So I don't really know if that means anything or not. Nick, it doesn't seem like they're really pushing for receiver early very much. And it really doesn't seem like they want Jordan Addison, which, he's a good receiver. It's maybe the top position of need remaining on this team. Omar's been busy in free agency. Why don't they want a receiver? And specifically, why don't they want Jordan Addison?
I just don't think it's very high on their priority list right now. They have at least two guys they trust very much in Pickens and Deontay. And I'll tell you what, I think they're higher on Anthony Miller and Calvin Austin than a lot of people are. I really do. I think that they like both of those guys. I think they want to give them a fair shake at it. They want to see what they can do. Gunnar Olszewski's still there. He has experience at least playing in the system. So they have three options. It's not like they're lacking bodies at slot receiver. They have about three or four guys that they can throw in there. But I would say this, it's just not a very important position in the Matt Canada offense. It's not an efficient position. They haven't really done much to make it valuable, so they're looking at guys in that third, fourth round range. Charlie Jones, Jonathan Mingo, Xavier Hutchinson. Those two make sense to me as guys that fit in a good spot for them draft capital wise, because it's just not a very important position to the Matt Canada offense, to be quite honest with you. And they have enough guys there. At least one of those guys I named, maybe two of the guys I just named that are already on the team, Miller, Austin, and Olszewski, are going to make the team. So they're going to have options there. So I look at that and I say, all right, yes, you need a more consistent option, but if you're not going to up the usage of it, if you're not going to up the importance of it, I just don't see a reason why you need a star there. So, and then outside, they don't really need a guy, right? They don't necessarily need a guy that can go outside and in. That would be nice, but they don't need that. Jordan Addison is that. I just don't think that they view wide receiver as this huge need right now, when I think they're going to try and surround Kenny Pickett with big guys, which is what I think tackle is. I think that's a big thing they're looking for in this draft, if they can get a big tackle or someone on the defensive side of the ball that can really be a cornerstone of their defense alongside their big three.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if there's a thing that they lack with the guys they have in the slot, it's size, right? You look at Calvin Austin, obviously notably small, but neither of Anthony Miller or Gunnar Olszewski is very big. And if you want a receiver that can play some slot and block, I just don't know that you can really count on any of those three guys to do that. Steelers do like to run out of three receiver sets a lot in this offense, and their wide receiver blocking has been abysmal since Juju Smith-Schuster left. So I do think there's an area there where, and if you look at a guy like Jonathan Ringo, you look at a guy like Xavier Hutchinson, who, by the way, Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan stayed at Iowa State to watch instead of going to USC, and Jordan Addison. And there's a couple other guys that sort of fit that build. I think that's a very realistic option. There just doesn't happen to be one of those guys, except for maybe Jackson Smith and Jigba, towards the top of the draft. It's all the big guys. If you look at top six receivers, Josh Downs is 5'9", Zay Flowers is 5'9". Jordan Addison's a little bit taller, but he's 170 pounds. Jalen Hyatt, same thing. Quentin Johnson is a pure outside guy. There just isn't that big slot, that Juju Claypool body that the Steelers have liked to use in that space. I just don't see one of those until we get later into this draft. So I just don't think it fits. Even if they wanted to make that their priority, what they really need isn't there.
Yeah, no, it's not really there. And I think Smith and Jigba is the one to pay attention to. When they made big splashy picks in the second round, it's often been guys that they've liked that have fallen due to BPA. Juju Smith-Schuster was a prime example of that. He famously has talked about how he basically didn't even talk to them, but he was BPA on their board and they took him.
George
So
Pickens,
that's
same thing,
yeah,
really.
yeah. Except they were really interested in Pickens. That was kind of telegraphed. But I think that he's the guy that could maybe force them to take him early. They went to his pro day, so they saw him too. So they have that base covered. That's kind of just one of those convenient checks that they could go see DeJuan Jones and Paris Johnson, and then also see him. So I don't know. I think the receiver position it's definitely needs someone. I think it needs size, as you mentioned, but I also think there's other avenues they can look at. Tight end is interesting. We talked about this. Does Connor Hayward now become a fullback H back like Derek Watt was last year? With no, he's not back yet. So do they need a tight end? And I think that's interesting. They've shown some interest in tight ends in this class where they've sent Alfredo Roberts out to see like Brenton Strange, for example. He went to Penn State to see him. So there have been some interesting.
Penn State's a really good example of what I'm talking about, right? Because I think everybody in the world thinks Parker Washington is a better prospect than Brenton Strange, but it was Alfredo Roberts, not Frisman Jackson, going to Penn State. Parker Washington, really good slot receiver, bigger build than like a Jordan Addison, but still a 5'10" guy. He looks like Gunnar Olszewski. Like they have that. I think if it's a slot guy, it needs to be a bigger dude. And I do really think the idea that Pat Freiermuth could be that guy, right? If you get another tight end, look, I mean, I don't know that there's a tight end out there in this draft class that's more athletic than Freiermuth that they're going to get. But if you get one that can just be an all around tight end, then I think that lets you move Freiermuth out into the slot. He's actually not really good in line. Freiermuth has been much better when he's moved off the line of scrimmage. So if you can get a Dalton Kincaid from Utah, Luke Musgrave from Oregon State, Luke Schoonmaker from Michigan, someone like that who's just like a normal size, regular, standard tight end, you can turn Pat Freiermuth into your slot receiver, into your Chase Claypool pretty easily.
Yeah, Schoonmaker is another guy Roberts went to see. Iowa Pro Day is pretty interesting here too because Sam Laporta's there for Iowa. He's a guy that's actually really interesting, very young, comes from a great school for tight ends, obviously. And his tape is really impressive. And I don't think he's going to be too out of their range. Like they could get him at 49. And I think that could be an interesting pick where maybe they take a tight end early and just ignore a wide receiver until very late, maybe on day 3, or they just wait till after the draft, sign a veteran or someone like that and to fill that void. But I think, drafting a guy like Laporta, if they're wanting real splashy, Darnell Washington could be another guy. But I think drafting a tight end is interesting because, as you mentioned, it frees up Pat Freiermuth to do a lot more. So that's the other option that they could have, right? And so they have, I think, 2 options. I think they draft a Mingo, someone like that, Hutchinson, or they draft a tight end a little earlier, maybe get Gentry out of the main lineup, and then throw that tight end in with Muth more. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting discussion. I think it's largely going to be kind of displayed by BPA, how things fall out, who the Steelers draft in their first pick too. Because if they don't draft a tackle, for example, at 17, maybe they draft a corner there, and then DeJuan Jones is there at 32. Well, they're not drafting a tight end. They're drafting DeJuan Jones. Yeah. So I think it depends on how the board falls, but my feeling is I think that they're going to probably go with option 1. I just think it makes more sense for them right now. I think that they can easily just plug in Hayward, Gentry, and Muth and just be like, all right, it's not a terrific room, but it's a good enough room. And then they can put in a Mingo, a Hutchinson, and be pretty confident they have a pretty solid slot receiver. Because it's not a great wide receiver class, but for those big slots, you're going to get enough production out of them to be really satisfied with what you'll get in the mid rounds.
And you talked about late free agency. There's still a lot of guys out there, like older guys mostly, but Randall Cobb, Jarvis Landry, Justin Watson. These are guys that could fill that role. Like you said, is not a super important role in this offense. They could do a lot of those things that the Steelers are looking to have their slot receiver do, especially some of that blocking. Older guys are generally a little bit better than that. At that. Even a guy like Byron Pringle hasn't played like exclusively in the slot, but as a bigger body, they could certainly go in there. There are options out there in free agency if they want to wait until after the draft and see who's still around and poking there. So it's not like they absolutely are in a position where they have to draft one of these. And I think you can say that about every position. That's one of the reasons I think I've been so impressed with what Omar Khan has done in free agency is there is no longer a spot where there's this just yawning, gaping need where they absolutely have to draft somebody. If Jordan Addison falls to 32, they still might take him, even if they don't really want him that badly. But if they don't get good value, I don't think they're going to reach for just about anything.
No, and I think that's the right decision here when you're going to year 2 with the quarterback. I think we talked about this before, kind of where year 2 of your quarterback is the biggest year for your quarterback. Surround that dude with as much talent, with as much help as you possibly can. And that come in the form of a receiver. But right now, I'd feel better about running out with this receiving core than I necessarily would running out with this tackle group. That's kind of just my opinion on that. I think while slot receiver is a gaping hole, tackle is a much more important position to what they want to do and for Kenny Pickett's future. So I think that it's pretty clear what they want to do. I think they want to beef up this O-line or beef up this defense. I think it's one of the two because you can help your quarterback do a really good defense too, right? Give him short fields, do all that, help him kind of stay ahead of the curve. So one of the two, I think, is going to be very important. I don't know exactly what position they're going to go after, but I just don't feel like wide receiver is that position. And it's just not a great receiver class. If it was a better receiver class with a lot of guys in there that you could maybe argue for, I think they'd be more appealing to them. But there's really no wide receiver one type in this class. Quentin Johnston could be that. Jordan Addison could be that. A lot of guys could be that. But, like, there's no slam dunk, right? There's not a guy there that you even feel good about. Like, George Pickens in this class would be fighting for top wide receiver
Top
one.
10 pick? Like,
yeah. So, like, I don't know. It's just not a great class either. So I just feel like this is not the class to be like, okay, we need that big receiver, and you don't need to because you have Deontay Johnson under contract for 2 more seasons. George Pickens is still on his rookie deal, and you still have some intriguing options in the slot. I'm still excited to see what Calvin Austin can do off that Liz Frank injury. Anthony Miller was having a really good summer last year before he got hurt. So I think they have some options there still. They'll add someone to this group. Maybe they'll add even 2 guys to this group. It wouldn't necessarily surprise me if they draft a guy and then sign a vet 2 on top of that, a cheaper vet option. But it's not some need that needs to be fixed right now because slot receiver just isn't important. And you're not getting a better slot receiver than Pat Freiermuth in that class.
Yeah, even if it's just bringing a guy like Miles Boykin back, I certainly think they're going to add 2 bodies. One more name I want to throw out there before we wrap things up. A guy we both really like, had a really good offseason. Bryce Ford Wheaton from West Virginia. Bigger body, could play outside, could play in the slot since he's had some trouble with press coverage. He's a guy that I think if you're talking about value, it is not an overall very good wide receiver position. But if you look at like potential versus where they're being mocked, I think somebody is going to take a very attractive looking swing on a late round receiver that has like number 1 receiver potential. And man, if that doesn't sound like something the Steelers would do, and there's a guy who happens to play college football in their backyard that could be that guy, I don't know. Just feels like a very Steelers pick to me.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? Just a big height, weight, speed dude that you can go after, and I think has that potential to shift into the slot. I think he's going to have to take on more of a possession type role in the NFL than he did at West Virginia. The drops are a little bit of an issue. The consistency is a little bit of an issue with that, but I think he's a pretty clear guy that they've liked in the past. I don't anticipate wide receiver evaluation is one thing Omar Khan is going to deviate too far from because Kevin Colbert was
don't
pretty
mess
good
with
at
that plan. Whatever you do,
exactly.
don't touch that one.
Don't touch that one. I think they're going to keep that one pretty right on the rails, especially given Andy Weidl's record with the Eagles. Not really one you want to go after. That wide receiver
let him
record.
stick to the offensive lineman.
Yeah, let him stick to the offensive lineman. Keep the wide receivers pushing this way, and Ford Wheaton's an interesting player because of his potential. I don't know if he'll necessarily ever be anything, but he's going to be a guy that has that sky high potential. He's more of a home run type of pick. What I mean by that is, you're swinging for the fences with him because if he ends up hitting, he could be a really, really good player. If he doesn't, I think he could bust out pretty quickly. But he's a fascinating player in that regard. Where if they don't get someone in the mid rounds and they want to look at someone a little later, I think he's a good option.
Yeah, I think so too. All right, let's wrap things up there. Lots to talk about receiver. We'll go to a different position tomorrow. We're going to keep going, different topic every day till we get to the 2023 NFL draft. Stick with us here, Draft Talk. For Nick, I'm Alan. Make sure you check out all the content at SteelersNow.com, and we will see you next time.